It's a great day to have a great day, and I welcome you to the Pirate Broadcast, and we're going to have a great time today. And I just want to let you know that all the things we're going through, let's look for an opportunity to actually improve our situation, improve what's going on around us. And today we want to talk to Sarah about, well, it's an interesting topic about let's not eat the elephant, all right? So let's jump into it. Let's dive into it. Welcome to the Pirate Broadcast, where we interview interesting people doing interesting things, where you can expand your connections, your community. Kindness is cool and smiles are free. And let's get this party started. Sarah.
Hi.
Good day. Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm fantastic. I was smiling a little bit at the don't eat the elephant. That takes the metaphor to a whole different, like even an accelerated level of.
Well, I won't say clickbait, but we gotta have something to bite off and chew, right?
Yeah.
Let's and it starts by not feeding the elephant. So
yeah.
First and foremost, thank you so much for joining us here on the Pirate Broadcast. It's really nice to be able to have you join. We connected, I think, a while ago.
It was fall 2019. So like in pandemic years, like 15 years ago.
Yeah. And finally, full circle, we get to come back and have a conversation. So thank you so much for joining me this morning.
I'm so excited. I mean, when I think back to our initial conversation, that was one that was like, that one I need to get back and with like just spending time with you, because you're such a giving and loving person. And I was looking back at our messages, so I'm excited to be here.
Well, thank you so much. And it looks like we have a few people in the room today.
Yeah.
Liz Lawless is joining us. Thank you so much. Love the title. Alex in from the Midwest there. Yeah. Actually, Chris Hennessy's in. Good morning, Jim Kunkel. And then fantastic Pirate Broadcast. Awesome. Marcia Reese, good morning. Thank you so much, Marcia. I love you. Sending love. And Alex says hi. Hi, Sarah.
Hi.
Russ Hedge, good morning. And then Kenny D. Yes.
Savor the flavor.
Katie. Savor the flavor, the awesomeness in you, sir, for sharing your delectable thoughts with us today and every day. Always. Russ Hedge going back and forth. So thank you so much. But one of the things that I want to make sure that we talk about today is, you've had this journey, and you help leaders lead. So one of the things that I always think about is, talk to us a little bit about your journey to this point in your life, because you didn't wake up one day and just say, "Oh, I'm going to coach leaders to lead." And,
No,
there's probably a little backstory about how you evolved into this position. So, for those that don't know, you kind of give us a snapshot of who Sarah is and why you're here today.
Yeah. I mean, like if we go way back, I'm the daughter of a union truck driver. So, I didn't understand the corporate office. That's not the lifestyle I grew up with as a child. Right. Was very much involved in a very different type of industry with my dad and a stay-at-home mom, and got a theater major because that was my passion. And then when I graduated and moved to Des Moines, as I lovingly say, to chase a boy, and that worked out. We'll have been married 15 years this year.
Congratulations.
Thanks. I got a job in insurance and finance, which is what everybody does in Des Moines. And that is where, in earnest, when I was in college, I spent my summers being a camp counselor and then a camp director for a camp for, what we called at that time at-risk kids. And at the same time, I was introduced to the idea of leadership through the ropes course there. And so when I was 19 years old, I was facilitating team building activities, not fully, I understood team, but not understanding power dynamics, right? And so in the constructs and what it means to be professional and all of that. And so that's where the seeds first got planted. And then once I moved into my first corporate gig, I became really interested in how could we make the training more effective using my background in theater education, and then just started to pay attention to how quickly teams would become toxic because of the leaders who were leading them, and was really fascinated with that. Got my master's in leadership development, and then just became, truthfully, over the last decade plus, just incredibly laser focused on how do we help those in positions of power use that power more effectively. And so that's a little bit of my journey.
It's interesting that you would come out with the creative side in the theater, because I think a lot of theater is navigating around ideas and concepts that you have to deliver in new and unique ways. And that's also part of, the opposite end of the spectrum is through leadership. You have to bring culture and influence individuals to bring out the best in themselves.
Yeah.
And so that's an interesting combination.
Well, I mean, and if you think about, I didn't realize this at the time, but I mean, there was a couple of really important skills I was learning in my theater training. Collaboration. I mean, it truly is. There's no small part, right? There's no small parts, because actors don't get seen if the people in the light booth aren't shining, right? And so there was such an orchestration that happened, so that was a component. Also, like creative arts, especially like theater, it is a culture of feedback. You are constantly getting notes. You are constantly expected to be receiving notes. And I remember that being a real shift of, people aren't as open to feedback in the corporate world. And like, that was really interesting because in the theater space, you just always got notes. And, and so that idea of working towards this mission and everyone, not that there weren't creative differences, but the collaboration is what set up a show for success. And it was such a culture shock for me and not only that, but right, like we talked about really deep topics. It was very much about self-awareness and self-exploration, that when I got into the cubicle walls of the shades of oatmeal, it was quite a culture shock for me.
I would have to imagine that going from ropes course to a cubicle is a little bit of a transition.
Yeah. Well, and then like at theater in there and all of that, it was, I mean, my first interview, they literally asked me if they thought I could sit still in the cubicle. And I was like, I don't know. Let's try it. let's figure it out.
Let's figure it out.
Yeah.
Let's try it. Let's try it. But I really love that dynamic of, the creative side, the interactive side versus, the leadership. So once you were in the cubicle and you're going on your merry way and doing things like that, what graduated you up to the idea and the concept of helping leaders in their journey?
Yeah. There was two things, right? I think on one was first from a technical training perspective, because my one of my degrees was in theater education, which wasn't teaching theater, but was using theater as an educational tool. And so the study was all about how do we tap into different ways of learning and right kinesthetic awareness and just different ways that we can share information. So I became really interested very quickly about how could we improve the training experience of onboarding team members. So fairly quickly, I got opportunities to do training, right, from a technical perspective. And then I there wasn't anything specific, but part of it was just, I think for me, it was, because in theater is all about the humanities, is just realizing there was so much humanity missing at work. There was so much harm that was happening, or if a team was working really well, I was really fascinated with that. And in taking a couple of different workshops related to leadership development, I realized, well, that's really fascinating, but I can't help them until I've led teams. So then I committed myself to just leading as many different types of teams as I could to build up that experience. How can I work with a manager who has to fire somebody if I've never gone through that? I mean, it's not that you can't be helpful, but it is certainly different when you're in the fire of having to make those decisions and manage teams and manage the business expectations. And so, so I was really committed to how do I build up my own experience leading teams while at the same time studying, right, getting my master's and then eventually moved on to overseeing the leadership development efforts at an organization before starting my own company.
Yeah. As Steve Jobs says, you can only see how to connect the dots looking back.
Mm.
So you can kind of see, and thanks for updating us on kind of this background, because I think it's important for people to understand that anytime you change positions or you change roles in your life, it's not that you don't lose that skill set or that experience. It's accumulated over time. And I think that's what makes great leaders, is the diversity and the way you have these experiences and you own them and bring them into the new experience. And
Yeah,
so
100%. I mean, we're all just rivers cutting our path, right? And I
I
think that
love that.
especially, sometimes we can get this maybe taking a different path, but here we go, let's cut. Is sometimes we get really caught in, what do I want to do or what do I want to be? And sometimes we just have to go, what am I interested in? Or what do I want to experiment with and see where it takes you? Because I mean, because I can look back on my career and I can think of explicit moments where I go, that was a moment when things changed. Oh, that was a moment. I didn't realize that at the time, but looking back was right. And they say our successes. There's really interesting research that says most of our success is happenstance, chance. And then there was a group of researchers who were like, well, so how do you increase the likelihood of successful chance instead of not? And they said it comes down to two things: the people you know and the risks you're willing to take.
Yeah. And all change is not delivered through a happy circumstance.
Sure.
Sometimes it's very uncomfortable. Sometimes it's traumatic at the time that you're going through it. However, looking back, you're thinking, I would not be here if it were not for that experience.
Mm-hmm. I think most of us probably are in that place now, coming through the pandemic, and maybe people are at varying levels of still being in it and maybe not feeling like they're on the other side of it yet. But yeah, I mean, we've all been shaped in pretty dramatic ways. When I see people now, or I guess when I go back to seeing people, hopefully soon, I feel like we need to reintroduce ourselves. Like, so who are you now? Because I know the last 2 years have changed you. And so I want to know who this person is.
Yeah, it's interesting it's going to be interesting to see how the next 5 years evolves and what we do when we look back at 2020 and 2021. I do want to ask you a question, though. One thing that comes to top of mind for me is, do you have a sense of how to define a good leader? Or is it like art when you know it, when you see it?
There are certainly yes and yes. For my and it's subjective, right? Because some organizations may say good leader is somebody who gets high productivity at like all costs, like regardless of the cost. I mean, I would argue that's not a leader. So let me take a step back. And when I talk about leader, I don't think of leader tied to a role, even though we say that. You're a manager, you're a director, but a leader is an act. It's a verb, something we do, right?
Yes.
I think that when I think of the best leaders, the best leaders are ones who understand that their job is to do everything they can to set up other people for success, which means if you don't truly care about the people you serve, I really don't believe you should be in leadership, because I don't think you'll be as effective. I mean, there's obvious things like not causing harm, doing the work of self-reflection to be able to see like your good intentions didn't result in the impact you wanted. So what are you doing to close that gap? But for me, and the way we define it in our company is that, the best leaders understand and honor human complexity. They understand that the humans they serve are complex, right? And they're not trying to fit them into simple little boxes. They're trying to take the time to get to know each of them. They're constantly seeking self-awareness, right? They're listening to learn. They're experimenting. And so from our perspective, that's what we see being the most effective leaders are the ones that are able to dance in that space. But that's not who gets promoted usually. Just
like you said, a leader is a verb. And I think a lot of leadership comes in at multiple levels in an organization. And that's what helps support the culture. And the more that you can promote positive outcomes through leadership within teams, helps build and support that culture in a positive way. So I want to give a shout out. There's several people who have joined us. Robert,
Hi.
all about serving others. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Joseph is here. It's a great topic during these times. Leaders need to step up. Absolutely.
In a way they don't maybe even know how to, is what we're seeing.
Michael Baker says proper relationships, knowing who to delegate what tasks to, who best fits in where within the organization. Absolutely. Jordan says, love it. Boxing prevents blossoming.
I love that. I'm going to have to keep that and quote you
keep
on
that one. Love it. Dance in that space. Absolutely. Joseph says, if serving is below you, leadership is beyond you. Man, a lot of great ideas here. Thank you so much, Pirates, for bringing this to the table. And so now I want to kind of fold this into the idea that there's this thing about elephants that you got. You took off on this elephant routine, and I was like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. Well, how do you get an elephant? You feed it. So let's talk about this feeding the elephant.
Yeah. So the title of the book is Don't Feed the Elephants. And it's a play on the metaphor, the elephant in the room. And I became fascinated with this idea of avoidance for a couple of reasons. One, growing up in the Midwest, I was very much like culturally, it's all about Midwest, especially a Midwest woman, right? A white woman in the Midwest is nice. You nurture, you serve, you smooth over, you do everything you can to not ruffle feathers. And so I've been on a journey to navigate my own conflict avoidance, and then realizing that I had never experienced a culture team in which elephants either were prevented or they didn't hang around long. And we know from like the work of adaptive leadership and psychological safety that the best teams are the ones where we can have the conversations and we can navigate those differences. And so building on this idea of the elephant in the room, the thing that over the last 10 years as I've been studying this and experimenting and trying to figure out, well, how the hell do you create a team? Like, how do you take a team that's not, right? Like, this is different working with my East Coast clients where they're, tend to be a little bit more direct. And, but what I realized is that a lot of times when we talk about this idea of the elephant in the room, it ends up being used to blame somebody, right? Like, Russ is the elephant, like, we've got an elephant in the room, Sarah.
I'm here.
Yeah. but in actuality, the elephant gets created because we're avoiding acknowledging or addressing, whether it's within ourselves, having a conversation internally or in a conversation externally. And so that idea of, well, no, like, don't give the elephant peanuts. Like, if you're creating the elephant, if you're giving them peanuts, it's because you're not having the reflection you need to for yourself to understand why are you frustrated with this situation, or you're not having the conversation with the correct people that need to. And so that's where the work comes from. Yeah.
Well, and I think that the key word right there is avoidance. You feed the elephant by avoiding the conversation and adapting, or at least navigating around or through the challenge. And in business, especially when you think about teams, everybody's going to have a different idea about how things need to proceed forward.
Absolutely.
And so, when you're feeding the elephant, it takes away from the core goal of getting through the challenges and to meeting the needs of the many. And so I think it's really important that we kind of think through this. So, what prompted you to kind of take on this topic and talk about it in this way?
I'm not exaggerating when I say this has been a mission of mine for the last decade, because I, again, my own personal experience, but also in my studies in my master's program back in 2008, was reading the book Adaptive Leadership, and they talked about how one characteristic of an adaptive team is where the elephant can be called out. And at the same time, the financial crisis was happening. Right. And I was observing these patterns of behavior from my leadership team that was causing incredible amounts of distrust, right? It's a story I share in the book. And this was a real linchpin moment for me, is that we had gotten an email saying that there was going to be staff reduction, right, from the powers that be in New York. no other details. People are losing it. They're freaking out, right? I'm getting the message at the same time as the team that I'm serving is getting it. And I remember going to the office of my leader and saying, "Hey, are we going to talk about this?" Like this being the email that just got sent. And the response was, "Talk about what?" And in that moment of not even acknowledging it, not even naming it. And it wasn't that they didn't know what we were talking about. They just didn't want to, or they weren't ready or whatever. And I understand now, like I can understand now, like psychologically what was triggering that response. But what happened is that in an already unsettled time, that team members went from, going, what does this mean? And when are we going to find out, to what else aren't they telling us, Sarah? Right. And I could see the erosion of trust happen. And yeah, that, that point that you're making about being able to navigate those difficulties, and the fact that there's always differences, right? Like, one thing that I'm a bit of a broken record on is in relationships, there will always be regrettable events. Most of our challenges with each other are perpetual because we just have different values, different ways of thinking, different ways of being. And so those little sandpaper moments, it's just an inevitable part of being in relationship with another human being, but it's also an inevitable part of being on a team when you have 7 or 8 human beings that are all bringing their complexity. And and so that's what really started it, and then just became this mission. And I felt like, and it's interesting because I felt like it was right. The practices we had developed that we had seen work pretty effectively in some situations, because again, we're talking about humans, and there's not a one size fits all approach to conversations or navigating conflict.
Not at all.
No, I mean, I wish there was, but again, humans are complex. So
yeah. Well, and as we grow and evolve, especially in the corporate environment, I mean, I worked for I think almost 30 years in companies that no longer exist. So I've been on both sides of the equation, in the leadership role where you had to get teams together, and it's really unfortunate. And it's challenging when you have to lay off everybody that you were working with, and then at the end of the day, you get laid off because your job is done because you laid everybody off on your team.
Right.
Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Corporate orphanage. The corporate orphanage is what I call that. So it's we go out we jump off the ledge, we build the plane on the way down, and we start a live stream show called the Pirate Broadcast.
I love it.
We're all a bunch of pirates here. This is what the mission is, to help more people, and that's exactly what this idea of not avoiding the crucial conversation. And I think there's a book out there about the same subject, about having these conversations so everybody knows exactly what the rules are. Everybody knows what the guidelines are and what to expect and anticipate. So
and the other thing, that I just want to mention is, and there might be times where you might not be able to have the conversation you want to, right? I'm sure you've worked in situations where it wasn't safe, where people did retaliate, and that risk goes up depending on who you are, right? There are some voices that are more allowed in the corporate space than others. And so, so part of this for me is, not only helping my fellow avoiders be able to step more into their courage from the standpoint of having the conversation, but one, sometimes we just need to have the conversation with ourselves that we're not having, and that can free an elephant. But the
sometimes it's us that needs the conversation.
Absolutely, 100%. And if I'm in a situation where there's something that's creating harm, but I really can't address it and acknowledge it in the way that I want to, how can I come from a place of choice instead of a default, so that even if I'm in a situation that's unsafe, that I can still kind of reclaim my power of, I'm not going to acknowledge it because of this, but I'm going to do this to take care of myself. And so, because, while I think we all wish and think of ourselves as people who can receive difficult conversations and navigate, disagreements or whatever. But the reality is that we all have brains that protect us. We all have
Yeah.
times when we don't show up at our best. We all do things that can create harm, whether it's intentional or not. And so in those moments, I want people to be able to reclaim their power and go, I'm choosing not to, and here's why, which is different than like, well, it is what it is. Like, I want people to come from a place of power, whether they're having the conversation or they're making the intentional choice not to.
And there's sometimes a challenging moment when you realize that the best choice for the team is not the best choice for me. And the leadership is the one that takes the right path, not the easy path. And I think Gabe is saying, I'm all about starting tough conversations simply because it brings out clarity in any environment and curbs confusion on purpose and strategy.
Yeah.
It is a lot easier when everybody knows what is expected of them, even if it's not comfortable.
Well, and what I would put out there is what we've observed is that there tends to be a greater comfort in having difficult conversations, not always, but difficult conversations about tactical things, technical things. But when it comes to relationship stuff, when it comes to, right, like you said something that was harmful to me, or I feel like we're not collaborating, right? It's when we talk about those relationship conflicts, that's when the risk gets really high and people will avoid even more, which makes sense. Right. Because there's an even greater risk. Us disagreeing about a tactic isn't as scary as us disagreeing about how the hell we're going to work together and repair this relationship that's been eroding.
And it's there are times where I see that compromise is less and less important in some conversations. And it's really not being agreeable is sometimes the best position to take. And sometimes it's counterproductive as well. Even if we disagree, we should be able to agree on what we need to do together to create an outcome that is beneficial for the greater good.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people have to reflect on what that looks like moving forward, because it's evolving as we speak. And I think that there's a lot of deep wounds that need to be healed, and a lot of collaboration, a lot of healing, a lot of kind of reflection. And I was having this conversation with myself yesterday, and it's like, okay, well, what role am I playing in my life right now? What am I doing? How am I doing it? How am I being? And what needs to change in order to increase and improve my outcomes with not only myself, but those around me? And how can I continue to support more people in what I'm doing? And how can I make an impact like that? So, we all have that reflection time.
Well, we don't all take it. And we also might not always be asking like the most powerful questions, right? The thing I want to highlight language you use that I think is a really important question is, what role am I playing?
Yeah.
And what role do I want to play? And, like I'm looking at Don's comment on the conversation he had about having true and honest conversations on diversity, equity, and inclusion, that it can be easy to go, well, the role I want to play is X, Y, and Z. A harder question is, what role am I playing that's getting in the way of whatever it is I want to accomplish, whether that's individually, whether that's as a team. And that's a real important practice for us. And for me personally, and my colleagues and I, is to make sure we're and it's not in a shaming way. That's not the intent, but it's to tell on ourselves a bit, to be willing to, we call it a courageous audit, or, and what role am I playing that's actually contributing to the issues Russ and I are having?
It's an inventory of where we are right now. It's, what do I believe in? What am I willing to continue to believe in? And what am I willing to let go?
I love that. I love that. Like, what am I willing to continue to believe in? Not what I think I should believe in, but what am I actually, right? What assumptions am I actually making?
Yeah.
And am I okay that those are the assumptions driving how I show up? I love that language, Russ, of
Yeah.
what am I willing to continue to believe in?
Yeah.
Is I think that's really provocative.
Because sometimes we, dig in and we fight like hell to.
Oh yeah.
It's like I'm not going to change my evil
Yeah.
ways.
Right, right. And some of it is so biological, right? Because our from the standpoint of our brains are I think humans are so fascinating because on one hand we're wired for connection and we're wired to be part of a tribe essentially to keep us safe. But then on the other hand, we have egos and we have these protection mechanisms that, can fly in a real short amount of time and put us into that protection mode. And our brain will almost always prioritize keeping us away from pain than it
Yeah.
will putting us towards pleasure. And so we also have all these mechanisms that can make us really difficult. And I don't say that as an excuse. That's why we have to understand it to go, oh
Well,
yeah,
and I
no.
think I think the other thing to recognize is that anyone is capable of being a hero or a victim.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a fine line that we have to play in order to assess how we are and what we're doing in that moment. So Michael Baker says, know your role, set your goal. Robert says, leaders need to be advocates to help drive change. And I think that self-assessment will deliver the outcome in that change. And Don Terrell says, people are uncomfortable with that ultimate thing of looking in the mirror and asking those hard questions about ourselves. And I think, being an author, I think that you really have to, take that moment of self-reflection and saying, what I'm believing in now still worth believing in?
Yeah, well, 100, yes, because I mean that resonates with me on a very personal level because I started writing this book and had the first draft done in November of 2019. Well, we know it happened in March 20, and not only the pandemic, but the increased understanding for a lot of us from a racial injustice perspective, navigating the political divisiveness, navigating just the challenges related to the pandemic and the trauma and all of that.
Right.
And so having to unpack even for myself to be one, okay. And I love your language of what do I believe now? Because I had to be okay with this book is a snapshot of who I am now. And even, I finished writing the manuscript 7 months ago and a lot has happened even in 7 months. Right.
Yeah. As soon as the ink is dry,
it's already evolved. And my publisher's like slapping the pen out of my hand and going, no, Sarah, we have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
And, and to be willing to receive and go, there are things that maybe I believe to be true, or maybe they are true for some, but they're not true for everyone. And so how do we honor and expand and acknowledge that, my lived experience as a white woman in the Midwest is very different than your lived experience. Right.
Yeah.
And how do we just continue to show up and be curious enough to go, what do I know and what do I not know? And how do I stay open to expanding that second part?
And then what am I willing to evolve to?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So is there a book 2 coming out?
Oh, the list of the growing list of what the next book is, increasing right now. I'm just focusing on this, but we are working on a companion workbook to go along with this, just to help people deepen their reflection, because even to that point of Don's point of it's hard to look in the mirror. That's why one of our first practices is get really curious with yourself. It's not a practice that we see most people that is their default. So the workbook is to reinforce that. And then, by the end of this year, maybe I'll be at a place to start thinking about what book 2 is.
Well, let's check in. Let's keep in contact. Sarah, if you want to get a hold of Sarah, she has a website. She has this online thing that she's, it's a website and everything. You can hire her.
It's a whole website.
It's a whole website.
I have a whole team.
I don't know if you've heard of the internet.
You can find me on that face page. In Iowa, we just got internet, so
I still have my MySpace page out there somewhere.
Oh, it's like my AOL name. JJ Noll. No.
There's nothing better than leaving the morning with a smile, right?
Yeah, we need enough. I'll take as many as I can get.
Yeah. Well, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us on the Pirate Broadcast and sharing a few ideas and thoughts along the way. Maybe somebody's gonna, hear this and, do some self-reflection, and maybe they're gonna stop feeding the elephant and take a bite, right?
No, don't eat it. I don't want people to eat it, Russ. I want them to free it. Stop feeding it and free it. I mean, if you want to feed it, if you want to eat it, that's fine. I'm not going to judge, but I just want to be clear. I want people to free it doesn't want to be in the room. Let it go. Just let it go.
Yeah. Let it go, everyone. Let it go. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for your comments, your ability and to join in. Dustin Miller, being open and involved is hard, even the most curious of us. Absolutely. Absolutely. And thank you so much for your comments, your time, effort, and energy. I just really appreciate and all the gratitude in the world for each and every one of you, because as you know, and I think I've said this before, kindness is cool and smiles are free. Because I want you to enjoy your day. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. Till next time, we're out of here. Bye. Thank you for joining the Pirate Broadcast. If you found this content valuable, please like, comment, and share it across your social media channels. I would love the opportunity to help others grow in their business. The Pirate Syndicate is a platform where you show up, we produce the show. It's that easy. If you want to be seen, be heard, and be talked about, join the Pirate Syndicate today.